The Awakening. The Sovereign Collective had existed for 18 million years. Their empire stretched across 7 galaxies, encompassing 12,000 inhabited worlds and countless species that had bent the knee to their absolute authority. They were the architects of cosmic order, the enforcers of galactic peace, and the undisputed masters of known space. Their technology was so advanced that entire civilizations worshipped them as gods. Their fleets were unstoppable. Their wisdom was unquestioned. They had seen the birth and death of 1,000 civilizations, and they believed with absolute certainty that they understood the fundamental nature of all intelligent life. They were catastrophically wrong. Scout Commander Varix of the Keltharian race stood aboard his observation vessel at the edge of an unremarkable solar system. His species had evolved on a world of perpetual twilight, giving him eyes that could see across a spectrum of light invisible to most beings. Right now, those eyes were focused on a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow sun. His mandibles clicked together in what his species considered thoughtful contemplation. The planet was designated Target 749 in the Collective's expansion protocols. It was the 3rd planet from its star, positioned in what the analysts called the habitable zone. Preliminary scans showed a single dominant species that called themselves humans. They had achieved basic spaceflight, nuclear technology, and rudimentary computer systems. By collective standards, they were infants playing with fire. Varix had conducted first contact operations on 47 worlds during his 5-century career. He had seen aggressive species and peaceful ones, technological marvels and primitive societies. None of them had ever posed a real challenge to the Collective. This mission should be simple, routine even. Catalog the species, assess their threat level, deliver the standard ultimatum, and move on to the next system. But something about these humans made Varix uneasy. He pulled up the detailed analysis reports on his display. The humans had only achieved spaceflight in the last century of their existence, yet they had already established permanent stations orbiting their world and sent probes to every planet in their system. Their technological advancement was occurring at a rate the Collective's xenobiologists called alarming. In just 200 years, they had gone from simple combustion engines to quantum computing. More disturbing were the cultural reports. Humans were not unified under a single government. Instead, they maintained hundreds of separate tribal nations, each with its own laws, beliefs, and military forces. They fought constant wars among themselves over resources, ideologies, and ancient grudges. Their history was written in blood, an endless cycle of conflict and conquest that had only recently begun to stabilize. The Collective psychologists had analyzed human behavior patterns and concluded that the species suffered from a fundamental flaw in their neural architecture. They were excessively territorial, absurdly emotional, and dangerously unpredictable. Their capacity for violence was matched only by their capacity for creativity. They made art about war and war about art. They were contradictions wrapped in flesh, impossible to categorize using standard collective assessment models. Varix transmitted his initial report to the Central Council on Meridian Prime, the capital world of the Sovereign Collective. Then he settled in to wait for instructions. The council moved slowly, as befitted beings who measured their plans in millennia rather than years. He expected to wait at least a week for their response. The reply came in 3 hours. The message was brief and absolute. Deliver the compliance ultimatum immediately. Await their response for exactly 30 planetary rotations. If they refuse, initiate protocol extinction. No exceptions. No delays. Varix felt his secondary heart skip a beat. Protocol extinction had not been invoked in over 10,000 years. The last species to face it had been the Harvesters, a race of world-consuming predators that had threatened to destabilize an entire galactic arm. The Collective had erased them so completely that only archaeological records confirmed they had ever existed. Why would the Council order such extreme measures against a species that barely qualified as spacefaring? He reviewed the assessment reports again, searching for something he had missed. There, buried in the psychological profiles, was a note from senior analyst Morpheus. It was flagged with the highest priority warning code. The note read, "Recommend extreme caution. Human psychology demonstrates unprecedented levels of persistence, adaptability, and what they term stubbornness. Initial projections suggest that if provoked, this species will not respond according to standard threat response models. Further study urgently recommended before any contact operations." The note had been submitted 6 months ago. It had been ignored. Varix programmed his vessel's communication array and broadcast the compliance ultimatum toward Earth. The message was translated into every human language simultaneously, transmitted on every frequency their primitive receivers could detect. It would be impossible for them to miss. The message was simple and had been delivered to thousands of species before them. Your world has been identified by the Sovereign Collective. You have 3 options. Option 1, submit voluntarily to collective authority and accept neural compliance modification. You will be integrated into our empire as productive members. Your aggressive tendencies will be removed. You will know peace. Option 2, resist and be eliminated. Your species will be purged from existence. Your world will be cleansed and resettled. Option 3 does not exist. You have 30 of your days to decide. Choose wisely. On Earth, the message appeared simultaneously on every screen, every radio, every device capable of receiving a signal. In homes, offices, military command centers, and government halls, humans heard the ultimatum. The world stopped. President Sarah Chin of the United Earth Coalition sat in the emergency session of the Global Security Council. Around the table sat the leaders of every major nation on Earth, connected by secure quantum-encrypted channels. The room was silent except for the soft hum of environmental systems. Everyone had heard the message. Everyone understood what it meant. The alien message had been clear. Submit or die. Become slaves with modified brains or be exterminated like vermin. There was no room for negotiation, no possibility of coexistence, no hope for diplomacy. The aliens saw humanity as a problem to be solved, not a civilization to be respected. General Marcus Webb of the Coalition Defense Force spoke first. His voice was steady, but his hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough to make his knuckles white. We have 30 days to prepare for the end of the world. What are our options? Director Yuki Tanaka of the Science Division pulled up a holographic display. We have been analyzing their transmission for the last 6 hours. Their technology is centuries beyond ours. Maybe millennia. Their faster-than-light capability alone suggests an understanding of physics we have barely begun to theorize about. In a straight fight we lose. Badly. Then we surrender, suggested Premier Alexei Volkov of the Russian Federation. We accept their neural modification. We live. As slaves, General Webb shot back. With our minds altered. Our free will stripped away. Our humanity erased. That is not living. That is existing as furniture for their empire. Better than extinction, Volkov argued. President Chin raised her hand. The room fell silent. She was young for a world leader, only 52, but her eyes held the weight of impossible decisions. She had been elected on a platform of unity and peace. Now she faced the possibility of leading humanity into its final chapter. Let me ask you all a question, she said quietly. In all of human history, has there ever been a time when we chose slavery over freedom? Have we ever decided that survival as prisoners was preferable to death as free people? The room remained silent. Everyone knew the answer. Throughout history, humans had chosen death over submission more times than anyone could count. They had fought against impossible odds. They had held fortresses to the last defender. They had charged into certain death rather than raise the white flag. It was perhaps their greatest strength and their most terrible weakness. We have 30 days, Chin continued. I propose we use them not to debate surrender, but to prepare for war. If we are going to die, let us die on our feet with weapons in our hands. Let us make them regret the day they came to our world. Let us teach the galaxy that humanity does not go quietly into extinction. One by one, the leaders around the table nodded. There would be no surrender. There would be no compliance. There would only be war. The next 30 days transformed Earth in ways that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. Every factory was retooled for weapons production. Every scientist was redirected to military research. Every able-bodied citizen was trained in basic combat. The nations of Earth, which had spent centuries fighting each other, united under a single purpose for the first time in human history. In orbital shipyards, construction crews worked around the clock building weapons platforms. They were crude things compared to what the aliens surely possessed, but they were built with human ingenuity and human desperation. Rail guns that could accelerate projectiles to a fraction of light speed. Nuclear-tipped missiles with quantum-entangled guidance systems. Experimental energy weapons reverse-engineered from theoretical physics. In underground bunkers, the best hackers humanity had ever produced worked to understand the alien transmission. They analyzed every bit of data, every carrier wave, every fragment of code embedded in the message. If the aliens used computers, then those computers could be hacked. It was a fundamental truth of the digital age. In training facilities across the globe, millions of soldiers prepared for a war unlike any in human history. They trained in zero gravity, in hard vacuum, in every hostile environment they could simulate. They learned to fight in space suits, to navigate in 3 dimensions, to think in terms of orbital mechanics rather than terrestrial geography. And in the deepest, most secret laboratories, scientists worked on projects that made even hardened military officers uncomfortable. Weapons that violated every treaty humanity had ever signed. Weapons that exploited weaknesses in biology, in physics, in the fundamental laws that govern matter and energy. Weapons that would haunt the survivors' nightmares for generations, if there were any survivors. On the 30th day, every human on Earth stopped what they were doing. In every city, every town, every remote outpost, people looked to the sky. Some prayed. Some cursed. Some simply waited with weapons in hand. President Chin broadcast a final message to the world. Today we face the unknown. Today we stand against an empire that considers us insects to be crushed. They believe we will surrender. They believe we will beg for mercy. They believe we will accept slavery to preserve our lives. They are wrong. We are humans. We are the species that climbed down from the trees and conquered a planet. We are the species that split the atom and walked on our moon. We are the species that has never, in all our long and bloody history, accepted defeat as final. So let them come. Let them bring their fleets and their weapons and their ancient pride. We will show them what humans are made of. We will show them that some species cannot be conquered. We will show them that they chose the wrong planet to threaten. In orbit above Earth, space rippled and tore. Massive vessels emerged from faster-than-light transit, their hulls gleaming with exotic metals. There were hundreds of them, each one larger than the biggest structure humanity had ever built. They formed a perfect sphere around the planet, blocking out stars, casting shadows over entire continents. Scout Commander Varix watched from his observation vessel. He had positioned himself at a safe distance, outside the combat zone. He was not a warrior. He was an observer. His role was to document what happened next for the collective's historical archives. He expected to witness a short, brutal extermination. The humans had no real fleet, no planetary shields, no technology that could threaten collective warships. This should be over in hours, perhaps days at most. The lead collective warship, the Inevitable Conquest, broadcast a final demand. Surrender now or be destroyed. This is your last chance. The response came not in words but in action. Every weapon humanity had built, every platform they had placed in orbit, every experimental device they had created fired simultaneously. The sky above Earth lit up like a second sun. Railgun slugs moving at impossible speeds tore through the formation. Nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant flashes. Laser batteries carved glowing lines across the darkness. And from hidden positions throughout the solar system, converted civilian ships emerged, their hulls packed with explosives, their courses locked on collision trajectories. The collective fleet reeled. Ships that had never known damage suddenly had holes punched through their armor. Shields designed to stop energy weapons were useless against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Command networks were flooded with damage reports and casualty counts. And then the real attack began. Every computer system in the collective fleet suddenly displayed the same message in thousands of languages. Welcome to Earth. You should have stayed home. The virus hit like a digital tsunami. It had been hiding in the original ultimatum transmission, buried so deep that even the most sophisticated collective AI had not detected it. For 30 days it had been dormant, waiting. Now it activated, spreading through every networked system, exploiting security flaws that had existed unchallenged for millions of years. Navigation systems reported false coordinates. Weapons refused to fire. Life support began randomly cycling. Worse, the virus was learning, adapting, evolving faster than collective programmers could counter it. It was not just code. It was a digital weapon designed by a species that had been hacking each other since they invented computers. Scout Commander Varix watched in horror as the Inevitable Conquest lost power and began drifting. Around it, dozens of other ships were experiencing similar failures. The perfect sphere formation collapsed into chaos. And through that chaos the human ships came. They were ugly, asymmetrical things, nothing like the elegant vessels of the collective. They had no shields, limited sensors, and crews that had barely trained for space combat. But they had something the collective had never encountered. They had spite. Human ships rammed collective vessels at full thrust, their crews knowing they would not survive. They fired every weapon until their ammunition was exhausted, then used their ships as guided missiles. They broadcast constant streams of insults, threats, and promises of violence that made collective translators malfunction from sheer incomprehension. One human pilot, her ship crippled and drifting, managed to broadcast a final message before her life support failed. Tell your leaders they messed with the wrong species. Tell them humans never forget. Tell them we will hunt them to the end of the galaxy if we have to. Tell them we are coming. The first battle for Earth lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the collective fleet had lost 200 ships. The humans had lost everything they had put into space. But they had proven something that would echo across the galaxy. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not submit. And humanity was far, far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Scout Commander Varix transmitted his report with shaking manipulators. His assessment was brief and terrifying. Immediate escalation required. These beings do not respond to standard threat protocols. Recommend full military deployment. Recommend extreme caution. They fight like they have already lost and simply wish to inflict maximum damage before dying. I have never seen anything like this. I do not know if we can defeat them. The report reached the Central Council on Meridian Prime. The council convened an emergency session. They reviewed the evidence. They consulted with military strategists, xenopsychologists, and historians. And for the first time in 18 million years, the Sovereign Collective felt something they had not experienced since their earliest days as a young civilization. They felt fear. On Earth, humanity buried its dead, repaired its weapons, and prepared for the next wave. They had won the first battle, but the war had only begun. And deep in the hearts of every human, something ancient and primal stirred. The part of them that had survived ice ages and predators, plagues and disasters, tyranny and genocide. The part that refused to give up. The part that would rather die fighting than live kneeling. The part that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. The war had begun. And the galaxy was about to learn that some species simply could not be conquered. The price of underestimation. Supreme Commander Thane stood in the War Council chamber on Meridian Prime, staring at the holographic display that showed the devastating results of the first engagement. His species, the Valorians, had been warrior kings before joining the collective 3 million years ago. They had conquered 40 systems before accepting collective authority. He understood warfare better than most species in the Empire. That understanding made the current situation even more incomprehensible. 200 ships lost. 200 vessels that had been considered invincible, crewed by species that had forgotten what true combat felt like. Destroyed or crippled by a civilization that had barely mastered interplanetary travel. The numbers did not make sense. The tactics did not make sense. Nothing about the humans made sense. The hologram replayed the battle. Thane watched as primitive human vessels, little more than converted cargo haulers and mining ships, threw themselves at collective warships with suicidal abandon. He watched as the virus tore through their networks, exploiting vulnerabilities that had existed for millennia but had never been tested. He watched as humans used kinetic weapons, fusion bombs, and boarding parties. Boarding parties in space combat. It was madness. It was also effective. The Council of Sovereigns sat in their elevated thrones, 7 ancient beings representing the oldest and most powerful species in the collective. High Sovereign Arcturus, a being of pure crystallized energy, spoke first. His voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder. Commander Thane, you have reviewed the tactical data. Provide your assessment. Thane chose his words carefully. The Council did not tolerate failure, but they also did not tolerate deception. High Sovereigns, the humans employ warfare principles we abandoned millions of years ago because we deemed them inefficient. They use kinetic weapons because their energy technology is primitive, but those kinetic weapons bypass our shields. They use computer viruses because they have spent their entire technological history defending against digital attacks from each other. They use boarding actions because they are willing to die to achieve objectives. That is not an assessment, hissed Sovereign Xyrith, a serpentine being whose species had mastered biological warfare. That is a description. We know what they did. Explain why our forces failed. Because our forces have never faced an enemy that fights like humans, Thane replied. For 10 million years, the collective has fought species that surrendered when defeat was inevitable, that negotiated when casualties became unacceptable, that valued survival above victory. Humans do not think this way. They have a concept they call mutually assured destruction. They will destroy themselves to destroy their enemies. They consider this rational. The chamber fell silent. The concept was so alien that even the most experienced strategists struggled to process it. Sovereign Morpheus, the only council member who had studied human psychology, spoke in a quiet, measured tone. I warned the council 6 months ago. Humans are persistence predators. In their evolution they did not hunt by being faster or stronger. They hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They killed by refusing to give up. This trait is embedded in their neural architecture. They cannot surrender easily. It is not in their nature. Then we will teach them, Arcturus declared. Commander Thane, you will take personal command of the Second Enforcement Fleet. 5,000 ships, full military deployment. You will sterilize their world and end this embarrassment. Thane bowed deeply. As you command, High Sovereign. But I request additional intelligence operations before engagement. We need to understand how they think, how they plan, what drives them. Denied. Arcturus's voice was final. You have overwhelming force. Use it. The humans die in 30 planetary rotations. No exceptions. Thane left the council chamber with orders he knew were flawed. Overwhelming force meant nothing if you did not understand your enemy. But orders were orders. He would take 5,000 ships to Earth. He would crush the humans. And if he succeeded, he would ensure the collective learned from this experience. If he failed, there would be no one left to learn anything. On Earth, Captain Elena Rodriguez stood in the command center of humanity's newly constructed orbital station, Defiance. The station was a marvel of desperate engineering, built in 29 days from prefabricated modules, asteroid mining equipment, and sheer human stubbornness. It was not elegant. It was not comfortable. But it was functional. Rodriguez was 43 years old, a former pilot who had flown everything from fighter jets to cargo shuttles. She had been chosen to command Defiance not because of her rank, but because of her reputation. She was known for three things: tactical brilliance, absolute calm under pressure, and a pathological refusal to quit. All three qualities would be tested in the coming battle. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander James Park, approached with a data pad. Captain, our scouts report massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. The aliens are coming back. Early estimates suggest 5,000 vessels. Rodriguez did not even blink. 5,000. They are taking us seriously now. We destroyed or disabled 200 ships in the first engagement, Park said. They are bringing 25 times that number. How do we fight that? The same way humans have always fought impossible odds, Rodriguez replied. We adapt. We improvise. We make them pay for every meter of space. And we make sure that if we die, they remember us for the next million years. She activated the command network, connecting her to every military installation on Earth and in orbit, every ship, every station, every weapon platform. Around the globe, millions of screens lit up with her face. People of Earth, this is Captain Rodriguez. The aliens are returning with 5,000 ships. They believe overwhelming force will break us. They are wrong. For the last 30 days we have not been sitting idle. We have been learning. We have been preparing. And we have been getting angry. She pulled up tactical displays showing the defensive network humanity had constructed. Hidden weapon platforms throughout the solar system. Drone swarms that could be remotely piloted. Experimental weapons that violated every ethical guideline humanity had ever established. And most importantly, captured alien technology that human engineers had reverse-engineered with terrifying speed. We know how their shields work now. We know how their faster-than-light drives function. We know their communication protocols, their tactical doctrine, their command structure. We have studied them while they dismissed us as primitives. That was their mistake. Rodriguez paused, letting her words sink in. The strategy is simple. We do not fight fair. We do not follow their rules. We use every advantage we have, including the fact that they think we are stupid. We are not stupid. We are humans. And humans are very, very good at killing things that threaten us. The Second Enforcement Fleet emerged from faster-than-light transit in perfect formation. 5,000 ships arranged in a sphere within a sphere, overlapping fields of fire, redundant command networks, every tactical advantage the collective had refined over millions of years. It was beautiful, precise, and absolutely unstoppable. Commander Thane stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and surveyed his forces with satisfaction. Whatever tricks the humans had used in the first battle would not work here. His fleet had updated software, enhanced firewalls, and protocols designed specifically to counter human tactics. Open a channel to the planet, he ordered. The communication officer worked quickly. Channel open, Commander. Thane spoke in the flat, emotionless tone required of collective commanders. Humans of Earth, this is Supreme Commander Thane of the Sovereign Collective. You have one final opportunity to surrender. Submit to neural compliance or be exterminated. You have demonstrated courage, but courage without wisdom is suicide. I give you one of your hours to decide. The response came in less than 30 seconds. It was not from a government leader or military commander. It was from an ordinary human, a young woman with dark hair and fierce eyes, broadcasting from what appeared to be a residential dwelling. Commander Thane, my name is Maria Santos. I am 24 years old. I work in a coffee shop in Sao Paulo. I'm nobody important. But I want you to know something. Every human on this planet just heard your ultimatum. And every single one of us has the same answer. Come and get us. The broadcast ended. Thane was confused. Why would they allow a civilian to respond to a military communication? It made no strategic sense. Then his sensors detected something that made his secondary heart stop. Throughout the solar system, thousands of small objects were accelerating toward his fleet. They were not ships. They were asteroids, space debris, even satellites. All of them had been fitted with crude engines and guidance systems. All of them were on collision courses with his vessels. Evasive maneuvers, he ordered. Point defense systems, engage. The fleet responded with precision. Laser batteries tracked and destroyed the incoming projectiles. Thousands of small explosions lit up space. It was target practice, really. The humans were wasting resources on a tactic that could not possibly work. Then the real attack began. While the collective fleet had been focused on the obvious threat, human ships had been quietly maneuvering into position using cold propulsion systems that barely registered on sensors. They were not military vessels. They were civilian craft, cargo ships, personal transports, even orbital construction vehicles. Each one was crewed by volunteers who knew they would not survive. They emerged from behind the debris field, engines burning at maximum thrust, and fired every weapon they had at point-blank range. Railgun slugs punched through shields. Missiles overwhelmed defense systems. Nuclear warheads detonated in brilliant flashes. More importantly, each human ship carried boarding pods. Crude metal cylinders packed with soldiers in armored suits, launched at such close range that point defense systems could not track them all. They slammed into collective hulls and burned through with cutting torches. Commander Thane watched in disbelief as boarding parties penetrated 17 of his ships simultaneously. This cannot be happening. No species fights like this. But humans did. They always had. Sergeant First Class Tyrone Washington was the first through the breach on collective cruiser Harmonious Peace. His armored suit was bulky and uncomfortable, but it kept him alive in the vacuum of space. His weapon was a modified railgun that fired tungsten penetrators at hypersonic speeds. It was loud, brutal, and effective. The interior of the alien ship was wrong in every way. The gravity was too light. The air was too thin. The lighting was in a spectrum that made his eyes hurt. But Washington had trained for this. Every human boarding party had trained for this. Move, 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 he shouted to his squad. Bridge is 3 levels up. Kill anything that resists. Capture anything that surrenders. They moved through corridors that had never been designed for combat. The collective had not fought a boarding action in recorded history. Their ships had no defensive fortifications, no armored bulkheads, no internal weapon systems. They were designed for efficiency, not warfare. The human soldiers exploited every weakness. They moved fast, struck hard, and showed no mercy to those who fought back. But they also took prisoners. Humans understood that intelligence was as valuable as victory. Washington's squad reached the bridge in 6 minutes. The door was sealed, but that was not a problem. 2 of his soldiers placed shaped charges while the rest covered the approach. The explosion blew the door inward and the squad poured through. The bridge crew were Keltharians, the same species as Scout Commander Varix. They were unarmed, untrained for combat, and absolutely terrified. Washington's squad secured them in seconds. Bridge secure, Washington reported. 23 prisoners. No casualties on our side. Similar reports came in from 16 other ships. Humans were capturing collective vessels faster than the fleet could respond. It was unprecedented, impossible, and absolutely terrifying for the aliens who had never considered that their own ships could be turned against them. Commander Thane made a decision that went against every instinct. Fall back. All ships retreat to the outer system. Establish a defensive perimeter. But Commander, we outnumber them, his tactical officer protested. They are inside our formation, Thane snapped. They have boarded our ships. They are using tactics we have no defense against. We retreat now or we lose the entire fleet. The second enforcement fleet began to withdraw, but the humans were not finished. From hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt, humanity's secret weapon emerged. They had spent 30 days studying the captured alien faster-than-light drives from the first battle. They had not been able to replicate the technology, but they had learned enough to build something else. Faster-than-light missiles. They were crude, unstable, and had a 50% failure rate. But the ones that worked covered the distance to the retreating collective fleet in seconds. They emerged from FTL travel at random points within the formation and detonated with the force of small stars. The Eternal Judgment took a direct hit. The bridge exploded. Commander Thane had just enough time to send a final transmission before the ship broke apart. They are not primitives. They are nightmares. Do not underestimate them again. The second enforcement fleet limped back to collective space with less than 3,000 ships intact. Over 2,000 vessels had been destroyed, captured, or left drifting in space. The survivors carried with them stories that would haunt the collective for generations. Stories of humans who laughed as they died. Stories of soldiers who fought with broken limbs and sucking chest wounds. Stories of civilians who volunteered for suicide missions because someone had to do it. Stories of a species that simply would not accept defeat. On Earth, humanity celebrated its second victory. They had lost thousands of ships and tens of thousands of lives. Entire orbital installations had been destroyed. But they had survived. They had won. Captain Rodriguez broadcast a message to the surviving collective ships as they fled. Tell your leaders that Earth is not for conquest. Tell them that humanity will never submit. Tell them that if they want this planet, they will have to pry it from our cold, dead hands. And tell them that even then we will find a way to fight back. The message was delivered. The collective council heard it. And for the first time in their long, proud history, they considered the possibility that some species could not be conquered, no matter how much force was applied. On Meridian Prime, High Sovereign Arcturus convened an emergency session. The losses were staggering. The implications were worse. If word spread that the collective could be defeated, that species could resist and survive, the entire empire might fracture. We must destroy them completely, Xyrath insisted. Send everything. 20,000 ships. 50,000. Whatever it takes. But Morpheus, the psychologist, shook his crystalline head. You still do not understand. The more force we send, the more fiercely they will fight. Humans do not calculate odds of victory. They calculate the cost they can inflict before dying. They have a phrase for this, spite. They will burn their own world before they let us take it. Then what do you propose? Arcturus demanded. I propose we do something we have never done before, Morpheus said quietly. I propose we negotiate. Not from strength but from mutual respect. I propose we acknowledge that humans are not primitives to be civilized, but equals to be respected. The council chamber erupted in protests and accusations. The idea was heresy. The collective did not negotiate with primitives. They did not recognize equals. They ruled or they destroyed. But as the arguments raged, every member of the council knew the truth. The humans had changed everything. They had shown that defiance was possible, that resistance could succeed, that the collective was not invincible. The war between humanity and the sovereign collective would continue for years. There would be more battles, more losses, more horrors on both sides. But the outcome was no longer certain. Humanity had proven that some species simply could not be conquered. In the end, the collective would withdraw from human space, establishing a neutral zone that neither side could cross. It was not a peace treaty. It was an acknowledgement that the cost of victory was too high. And throughout the galaxy, other species heard the story of Earth. The story of a young, primitive civilization that had faced an ancient empire and refused to kneel. The story of humans who fought with obsolete weapons, impossible odds, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The story spread like wildfire. On worlds that had submitted to the collective, resistance movements began. On planets that had been considering collective membership, councils voted to remain independent. The empire that had stood for 18 million years began to fracture. All because of one small blue planet and the species that called it home. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on Defiance Station, looking down at Earth. The planet was scarred from the battles, but it was healing. Humans were good at healing. They were good at surviving. They were good at fighting. She thought about the aliens who had come demanding submission. She thought about the battles yet to come. She thought about the message humanity had sent to the galaxy. We are humans. We do not surrender. We do not submit. And we do not forgive those who threaten our home. Come to our world in peace and we will welcome you with open arms. Come to our world in war and we will show you why Earth breeds survivors. That message had reached every corner of known space. And the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Never, ever underestimate the species from the small blue planet. Because humans do not just fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemies regret the day they started the war. The sovereign collective had declared war on humanity expecting a quick extermination. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrifying. They had reminded humans that their greatest strength was not their technology or their intelligence. It was their absolute, unshakable, pathological refusal to give up. And in a galaxy full of ancient empires and powerful civilizations, that made humanity the most dangerous species alive. The war had ended. The legends were just beginning. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, other species watched and wondered. If the humans could defeat the collective, what else might they be capable of? What other impossibilities might they achieve? The galaxy was about to find out. Because humanity was no longer content to stay on their small blue planet. They had tasted victory among the stars. They had proven they belonged in the cosmic arena. And now they were coming. Not as conquerors, not as destroyers, but as the species that simply refused to die. The species that fought like they had nothing to lose because their freedom meant everything. The species that had taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. Some fights are not about winning. They are about making sure the enemy knows they picked a fight with the wrong species. Earth had spoken. The galaxy